Hello, everyone. This is episode number 9 of the World War II Daily Podcast with your hosts, Samuel DeCourty and me, Pietro Deserti. We are happy to have two experts from the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum with us today. Originally, we were set to talk to Cesar Maximiano Campiani about the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, but that interview will be happening next month, so stay tuned. First, I want to thank Mr. Jason Fung and Mr. Cale Carter for taking the time to join us today, especially on such short notice. They only got the invitation 2 days ago. So, before we get started, don't forget that this show is available on YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, and Amazon. Be sure to like, subscribe, and engage with us. It really helps the project. For daily World War II content and updates about the show, follow us on Instagram at World War II underscore daily and at Samuel.decorti. Links will be available on the description of the episode. With all that said, let me introduce our guests. Starting with Cale Carter, the director of exhibitions at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. Born in Columbia, South Carolina, Cale Carter has always had a passion for history from an early age. This passion brought him to the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum to serve as a volunteer docent in 2008. After graduating from Dickney High School in 2012, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, okay?
It's all right.
He attended, yeah, okay. He attended Lone Star College, North Harris, before transferring to Houston Tillotson University, where he majored in history and minored in political science. While at Hudson, sorry, Houston Tillotson, Kao was a fellow in the Mellon Mace Undergraduate Fellowship and conducted research in the French military archives on an Afro-French aviator who served in the French Air Force during World War II. In addition to being a Mellon Foundation Fellow, Cale was also a Fellow at the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers. When not in class, Cale was an interpretive assistant with the Texas State Parks and Wildlife Buffalo Soldiers Heritage and Outreach Program, where he worked as a living historian portraying the 25th Infantry Regiment on the Western frontier as well as World War II. After graduating, summa cum laude with a BA in history. He returned to his home state where he worked with Columbia SC 63, a civil rights history organization, and the South Carolina Military Museum as a curator of exhibitions. Currently, he is the director of exhibitions for the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. And now, Jason Fung, the arch. Let me ask you. I'm an English teacher, but it's archivist or archivist?
Both work.
Both work. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Good learning. Jason Fung, the archivist of the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. His love for military history started as a childhood passion that later evolved into the museum world. His first experience was a docent at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, talking about the dinosaurs at the Central and Sugarland campuses from 2011 to 2015. Jason graduated from the University of Texas at San Antonio with a Bachelor of Arts in History and a minor in Environmental Science in 2017. He went on to attend the University of Texas at Arlington to receive his master's degree in archival administration and a public history certificate. During his time at UT Arlington, his museum experience truly flourished. He had the opportunity to intern at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum in 2020 and the Military Museum of Fort Worth in 2021. Um, 1 year later, BS&M, the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, hired him to be their archivist. So, Mr. Fung and Mr. Carter, welcome to the World War II Daily Podcast with Pietro Deserti and Samuel De Corti. Before you say anything, I got this information online. So, if there's anything you guys want to correct or add, please do it because I don't really know if I'm well correct about the information.
Say I wouldn't fret about it. Like, that's pretty much everything. Like besides,
Yeah.
All
they
right,
gonna talk about my background anyway. So
all right. And you, Jason, nothing. It's good.
Oh no, I'm pretty content with what you said. It basically summarizes my life pretty well.
Okay, all right. I got this information from places.
Yeah.
All right, so okay, so let's go straight to our questions here. So first question: where did your interests in the Second World War come from?
you want to go first, Jason? I think yours is more interesting than mine.
Um, so I don't really like stereotypes. But my parents has always tried to push me to become a doctor, something to do with regard of medicine. However, that was never really my strongest passions. I really liked history a lot, not really science and that. So one of the things that I started to read was the history of medicine, history of doctors and how they put people back together and surgery and stuff like that. And of course, all of those practices and all of those uh, medical concepts really began in the military as doctors are trying to save soldiers' lives. So that was kind of my in kind of that point where I was like, you know what, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, but I don't want to be a doctor. I'd rather study doctors tangent things like military medicine, you know? So World War II, of course, is that largest change, big event that changed, the world essentially, and a lot of casualties, a lot of people died. However, we tend to talk about World War II in terms of death, casualties, and destruction. But there's a lot of medical innovations that happened to try to bring back the soldiers, right? World War One saw prosthetics, saw facial plastic surgery being a thing, and World War II really kind of refined those practices to help veterans along the way. So that's one aspect of it. But of course, as a war historian now today, the other part of World War II that I really enjoy talking about is that change in our military doctrine and military kind of revolution in a sense. Because with the introduction of nuclear weapons, we no longer really launch total wars now. It's all limited wars. And so it's very fascinating kind of oxymoron to study a limited a limited war when such mass destruction and casualties are being reported in that aspect.
That's cool. All right, so Kale,
Like I said, mine is not as interesting as his. Basically, so
no problem.
so the way I got introduced to history really comes through my family. My family were pretty much big into family history. And where I grew up in South Carolina, I grew up not far from a military base. I grew up from, like, I was literally right in the landing pattern from McIntyre Air National Guard Station. So I would see jets fly over, ask my dad, hey, what's that jet? And he's like, I don't know, go look it up. So I started basically doing research on the aircraft. And then that kind of got my interest into the initial military history. But then as I got older, some of the older folks in the family would start talking about the veterans and saying, "Oh, well, your uncle so and so was in World War II. Like, what did he do? Well, we don't know." Or like, he was in the Navy, but he was in this unit over here, but we don't know exactly what he did. So that kind of drove an interest. Like, what about like black participation in World War II? And of course, at this time, most of the coverage of anything black related in World War II focused on Tuskegee Airmen. Now I knew nobody in my family was a Tuskegee Airman, so I'm like, hey, I'm like, there's got to be other black units apart from the Tuskegee Airmen that served in World War II. Like, and so as a result, that kind of started me down a path where I was trying to find out any more information about black units that might have been kind of not only lost to history, but are not really well covered as the more the more well known black units. So by the time I hit, I would say my teenage years, my focus went from military history to black military history in World War II to focusing on black participation in the Pacific theater in World War II. And that's what kind of led to that whole kind of this like this passion for like Black World War II, but in particular the Pacific theater. And that's what I kind of got involved in researching the 93rd Infantry Division, what they did. And so by the time I got into college, like ironically, when I went joined the Mellon Mays, my original research project was to research the 93rd Infantry Division in the Pacific Theater in World War II and how it may have had a long term impact. Unfortunately, the program I was in, they didn't feel that was interesting. They said, "Well, that's not really interesting." And then the school I went to, it really didn't have a military history program, so they're like, "Well, that's not really interesting. We need you to talk about something that's more interesting and more marketable." And that's how I ended up in France. But I say all that to say that, yeah, like my interest really kind of focuses on Black translation in the Pacific Theater. And yeah, the way it got started was simply because I asked my dad a question and he said, "I don't know the answer. You have to look it up for yourself." So,
Awesome. Samuel, what came to my mind when he was talking about the black soldiers in the Pacific Theater? The picture I posted, and you spotted the black soldier who was
The Coast Guard photo.
Coast Guard. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I didn't notice, and Samuel like, oh, that's a black soldier over there.
Hmm.
He saw the hand, and
Mm.
then he did the research, and he found the whole story of that picture. Funny thing.
yeah, it's really,
Okay, do you have anything else to say?
I was going to say, like, yeah, that's part of the reason why I find the Pacific Theater so interesting too, is because while Europe gets majority of the focus, when you look at the Pacific campaigns, well, one, in terms of just Black units alone, majority of Black units that would be deployed were in fact deployed to the Pacific, if I recall correctly. Like it's not really just not only in terms of combat oriented units per se, but a lot of the service units when you incorporate both the Western Pacific, the South Pacific, and as well as China, Burma, India, you see the bulk of Black units basically being deployed there and stuff like that. So as well as kind of the cultural infusion that you see that basically occurs with Black soldiers being stationed in India, China, as well as the various island garrisons in the South Pacific, including the Philippines and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll try to keep it short and keep it that way.
No,
So
but it's interesting you mentioned that because since I'm from a country that has no like big interest in general, like society has no big interest in military history in general, and they should. But anyways, we never hear anything about. I don't know how that works in the U.S. or in Europe, but we never hear about black soldiers in the Pacific. Not at all. So it was fascinating to me that Samuel saw that guy over there, and then I learned that the National Guard was actually transporting, driving. I don't know, manning these landing crafts to drop troops on the beaches. I don't even remember which battle it was, but it was like I didn't know that, and then it was like okay, and I learned something that I never imagined that happened. Um,
I would
okay,
like to.
Samuel, do
Oh,
you want to go ahead?
yeah. Yeah, I would like to add that there's a difference in combat units like artillery, tank battalions, Tuskegee Airmen, which of course generate a lot of the attention as to the more service units, which were deployed largely in the Pacific. I
True.
believe there were a couple of Black Marine units, but there were not many Black combat units in the Pacific Theater, which might explain again the difference.
Cool. Do you wanna go on for the next question, Samuel?
Sure. So, what is the Buffalo Soldiers Museum?
Oh, great question. So the Buffalo Soldier National Museum is a museum focused on the African American military experience. It was founded in 2000 by Captain Paul J. Matthews, who was a veteran of the Vietnam era. And one of his stories that he tells is that when he was studying in officer school, he read only a couple lines about Buffalo Soldiers, and that was it. And he didn't really know what it was. So that kind of started his journey into kind of collecting and researching what that subject matter is. But eventually, he turned it into a museum after his collection grew. His private collection soon became a public collection, and that was the foundation of our museum. However, our museum has expanded from just the Buffalo Soldiers in that we now focus on the African American military experience, which covers from pre America to contemporary, such as the global war on terror eras. And for that, we are a museum that focuses on the military history as well as the kind of the historical narrative of the Buffalo Soldiers, because there has been a lot of mystification and a lot of a way of how people portray Buffalo Soldiers. Sometimes it's not always accurate. It's been folklorized in a sense. And our goal is to try to make sure that people actually know the real history of that, to give those veterans the justice that is due to them. And so for our institution, we focus on catering to veterans specifically, allowing their stories to be heard and their stories to be preserved, so others can learn about it, others can do research and grow from that.
Awesome. It goes. It's nice because me and Samuel, but at least from for me, I try to do as much as I can to get stories out there. I don't want to let these stories die as the veterans are dying, and it's
Yes.
going to be up to us to keep it alive.
Hmm.
And this is amazing. It's amazing. Thank you for what you guys do. Kale, do you want to say anything about it?
No, Jason pretty much
All right.
covered it. Yeah, he pretty much covered
All right.
everything on that portion.
Awesome. So that's the okay. Let me get the that's the Buffalo Soldiers Museum. Okay, so next question. Let's go. Now we want to know who were the Buffalo Soldiers during the Second World War. Right? We know the story. The story. I know the story dates long before the World War II, but during World War II, who were they? What were they doing?
So, for context, when people say Buffalo Soldiers, there's normally two types of groups that come up there. When people say Buffalo Soldiers, particularly in World War II, the first unit that comes to mind is the 92nd Infantry Division that served in Italy. And but however, when you mention Buffalo Soldiers, particularly, I would say in the United States, and I would say the southwestern United States, the image that comes to mind is not the 92nd Infantry Division, but rather the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments and 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments. And so when you talk about that definition of who's considered a Buffalo Soldier, we'll try to basically give that summarization before we go to the core question. When you talk about who's considered a Buffalo Soldier, the U.S. Army officially only recognized the 10th Cavalry Regiment as officially Buffalo Soldiers. When you talk to I would say some of the military historians, but then also when you talk to some of the black historians, they will say the Buffalo Soldier regiments were, as they define it, any regiment that was in the regular U.S. Army that served between a period of 1866 to about 1898, but some will extend the definition to as late as 1944. And and so when you use that definition, that the Buffalo Soldier regiments or Buffalo Soldiers really only refer to the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, 24th, 25th Infantry. And this kind of begs the question, well, who's truly the Buffalo Soldiers and who is not? Well, again, I said the U.S. Army officially only recognizes the 10th Cavalry as truly Buffalo Soldiers. And other folks will say, oh, the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiment and 24th, 25th Infantry Regiments are the true Buffalo Soldiers. Anybody else who has that name are not officially Buffalo Soldiers. And so, unfortunately, we talk about the 92nd Division, while they're often kind of erroneously referred to as Buffalo Soldiers, their actual designation is really the Buffalo Division. And when you look at it, well, how did that come about? It actually, at least from the research we've done at the museum, it pretty much traces back to, I think, 1917, specifically with the 367th Infantry Regiment, who referred to themselves as Buffaloes themselves. They referred to themselves as Buffaloes. And we only can speculate that from the 367th Infantry Regiment, since they was attached to the 92nd Division in World War One, that the term kind of spread out to encompass the entire division. But what's interesting is that when you look at the when the 367 kind of lists in their unit history, when they're turning in their colors at the end of World War One, they say, hey, we take this name to pay homage to the black soldiers who served on the western frontier because they were referred to by Native Americans as Buffalo Soldiers. So with the 92nd Infantry Division, the 92nd Division in World War One, but later the 92nd Infantry Division in World War Two, they even though they're called the Buffalo Division, some people erroneously call them the Buffalo Soldiers, probably because they say, oh, well, they use the same terminology and stuff like that. But in reality, when you look at it, they're kind of considered essentially an offshoot legacy of the original Buffalo Soldiers, because one, a lot of the guys, but I think it was specifically the 25th Infantry Regiment, who contributed to a lot of the guys, a lot of the initial staff for the 367th in World War One. But also you see kind of this, it kind of carries over in World War Two with the 92nd being built again from veteran soldiers that came from the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments and 24th and 25th Infantry. And so you see them still kind of having that tie. But to officially answer the question, we talk about the Buffalo Soldiers in World War Two, the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, they were disbanded by 1944. In fact, they have kind of the last distinction of being the last, like, quote unquote, horse cavalry in the U.S. Army. They were deployed to North Africa along with the reformed 2nd Cavalry Division, and they were disbanded and converted into service units. And what is ironic, even about them being converted into service units, is that some of those guys, some individuals from those units would ultimately end up serving as individual combat replacements for the 92nd Infantry Division in Italy. So it's like, so in a sense, like, even though the 92nd is technically not Buffalo Soldiers, they have a lot of interconnected history with the true Buffalo Soldiers that served. And but when you go back to like the Buffalo Soldiers, like the Buffalo Soldier regiments in World War II, while the 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments, they were deactivated in North Africa, and officially from that point they ceased to exist. And most of the service units that were made up of those units were essentially just used as support for the rest of the war. The 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments, which were the other component, they actually went to serve in the Pacific. In fact, I want to say the 24th Infantry was one of the first, was one of the earlier black combat divisions. I can't say the first, I'll say one of the earlier ones, because they were deployed in April of 1942, but they
Mhm.
spent most of the first few years of the war kind of doing garrison duties on various islands, and then they would be brought to Bougainville where they would see combat, I think, ironically, a month before the 25th Infantry Regiment arrives, which was used to kind of build the 93rd Infantry Division. So in terms of the original Buffalo Soldier regiments, while the cavalry regiments in World War II were disbanded and they kind of spent the rest of the war as service units, the infantry regiments, which ironically enough, in terms of the Western frontier, they don't really get the same level of attention as the cavalry. They actually kind of come into their own during World War II, where they're serving on these islands in the Pacific, Sea in combat. Sure, they might have did a lot of garrison details and stuff like that, but in the case of the 24th, they see action pretty much all the way up to the end of World War II. And in fact, by the end of the war, they're one of the last remaining of the original Buffalo Soldier regiments. And in the case of the 25th, they're literally used to build an entire division that would deploy to the Pacific Theater, and they would go on to have some honors of their own. When you talk about the 92nd, as I mentioned before, while they're not, when you talk to people here that's in like Buffalo Soldier history, say, oh, well, someone said, people that truly know will say, oh, well, they're not officially Buffalo Soldiers, but again, their legacy is so interconnected that when you talk to some people that say, well, it's almost like when you have to be like, well, they're Buffalo Soldiers. Just go ahead and loop them in there. Even though by official designation, they're the Buffalo Division and stuff like that. So
That's super cool. Very good
Very interesting.
history lesson. Very
so this
interesting. Do you want to say something, Samuel?
No, I think it's really interesting. I also did not know this difference between these two units.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Do you want to add something, Jason?
That's one of the things that our museum is trying to explain to people is that there are distinctions, and while there are celebrations of Buffalo Soldiers, also keep in mind they're different things, and so both should be honored in that way as well.
Yeah. That's super, super cool. Super cool history class right now. Okay. Samuel, do you want to go ahead with the next question?
Sure. Can you describe a recent educational program that shared the Buffalo Soldiers' legacy?
So, in terms of educational programs, one of the things that Jason and I have been advocating for since we came on board of the museum is educating the public about like Buffalo Soldier history, but also like Black military history in different ways. So, normally at the museum, the best way that they would kind of do education is kind of the traditional. So, like, okay, well, We have the exhibitions, we show people the exhibitions, and then also like every now and then, like one of the staff members may go out and speak about the Buffalo Soldiers, but they're restricting it to the Western frontier. Now, the thing about doing that is that with doing that, the people that's really into the history, they will come and see it. But the people like I would say like people like kids and people who may have either a casual interest or really no interest at all in the subject matter, that may not work. So how do we try to engage people into a subject that they may or may not have any interest in? And so one of the things that like both that was mentioned before that I've had experience in, and even Jason himself, he had experience in doing was living history. And one of the things about living history is that while living histories in some spaces don't really get a lot of credit, like normally when you talk about the military historians and historians, like living historians are kind of at the, I would say not at the very bottom of the totem pole, but they're close to it. Like at the same time, oftentimes when we, especially I know in the case of the United States and a lot of the areas I've been in, oftentimes the person you're more likely to interact with regarding this history is a living historian, and oftentimes they're often on the front lines of providing the kind of the initial critical information, and as well when you talk to a lot of people too, that they end up being kind of the initial entryway for people to have a kind of a budding interest in this. So what Jason and I, and then also she's not on a call, but I gotta shout her out because if not, she's gonna probably kill me later. Dr. Michelle Tovar has been kind of spearheading. We have been trying to spearhead bringing in like living historians, and a primary example of this would be a living historian who was one of the guys who actually trained me was Alan Mack. So Alan Mack is a guy who does a lot of. He initially started with the Buffalo Soldiers, like a lot of us did, but he went on to expand to cover both the USCT and the Civil War, and is expanding to cover like Black participation in World War II. And I think he's trying to expand to go as far as Korea. And so the idea that we had was that we'll bring in him, we'll bring in Louis Padilla, and then we'll kind of touch on it towards the end of the episode, but basically developing programs to where, okay, we bring in people who are really knowledgeable in this history because, like, if you think I'm knowledgeable, you have to talk to Alan. Alan will probably, like, I may get him in World War II, but when it comes to USCT, he will clean somebody's clock, basically. So the thing is, like, we try to bring in those people who are really knowledgeable in this, but more importantly, they know how to interpret that knowledge and explain it in a way to where people who are not interested or may have a casual interest in this can walk away and be like, wow, I learned something new and now I want to engage in it. So yeah, we've been trying to spearhead more living history programs, and also even when it comes to exhibitions, trying to do exhibitions now where we show how this history still has a long-term impact well after. Because one of the things that I know that most of us probably have encountered here is that when we deal with people who may not have an interest, they say, well, why are you studying something that occurred 80 years ago? Like people who was involved, they're long gone, they're passing away, or they're long gone. Why is this important? And so one of the things we've been trying to do too is that when we do programming or even exhibitions, kind of add that component to talk about the legacy impact and how it still impacts us to this day, even though it's been 80 years ago, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
That's
Um,
something. Oh, no, Jason, go ahead.
okay, so I wanted to add on to Kale's message about so often we hear that history is kind of a dead subject, right? It's a subject that's really not worth studying because it's in the past. That's why we use the term living historian to showcase that history is still alive, still very active, and we try to connect history to contemporary events, events or things that you still directly impact you. For instance, regards to living history, one of the things to keep in mind is it's kind of different from reenactments, and because living history is a public service. You're there to educate the people. Many of us, when we study history, we read a textbook, right? We read a book, and sometimes it can be boring. Sometimes it may not really give you the full effect. But what a living historian does is bring that book to life, right? You're sitting there talking to that person, and on the side will be uh, artifacts, equipment to showcase objects you can touch, you can hold, you can interact with, and ask questions. And the asking of questions is very fundamental in the study of history because history is an inquisitive subject, right? And so when we push out museum programming, we always want to push it out from the inquisitive perspective so that people can engage with that subject matter. And living history is a great way to do that.
Awesome. Go ahead, Samuel.
No, what I wanted to add is that even though it might be 80 years ago, it's still very relevant today because we still meet people today who are directly impacted by the war. I did a series of interviews with children whose father was executed during the Second World War. And even though these people are now 70 or 80 years old, like you can still see the impact of this event, which happened such a long time ago, and how it impacted their lives and how it impacted their way of living in the present. And that's the same for Black American soldiers. I'm thinking often in some of these interviews, which have been conducted after the war, some of these soldiers will mention like my grandparents, they were born in slavery. Um, so at that time, like these people were treated as property, and then fast forward until the Second World War, and now these soldiers are fighting as part of the American armed forces, and that's even though it was like a similar time gap, 70 years, it's still such a shift in culture, in mindset, in U.S. society, and that's what I wanted to add to it.
It's the dip change in the entire society. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. Well, I was going to add some things about like I like the term Jason used, like history is a dead subject. Yeah, I get a lot of that. People talking to me like on my friendship circles and people around me like why are you doing that, why are you doing that? It's like because the world you live in right now was shaped by those people back then. You got to understand what happened then in order to understand what's going on right now. I'm just gonna put a little thing here. Yesterday we had a, I'm not going to mention precisely what it was, but a major turn of events in the Middle East. And people were asking me like, what do you think about it? What do you think about it? Well, what I think is this, and this. And why do you think this? Because I know the story. I know what happened before, so I can
Hmm.
kind of interpret it, what's going on now. But yeah,
History is
anyways,
a great tool to study the past to prepare for the future.
yeah,
Exactly.
perfect. People tend to say, it's just in order not to repeat the past, but I don't think it's only
Hmm.
that. Okay, that's part of it, but it's also in order to, well, how can I? I'm a teacher, right? So
Hmm.
I'm every day I'm inside of the classroom. I'm teaching English, but I use history as because I love it. So I
Hmm.
use history as a way to put English into their
Yeah.
little heads. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, and it's awesome to see them when they start to understand why things are like they are
Hmm.
because of what happened, and they're like you see in their eyes, they're like, oh, is that real? I was like,
Yep.
yeah, it's real. I can show you a picture of it.
Yeah, it's those connections that make what me and Kale do very rewarding in a sense. To see those kids connect the dots and understand, hey, this event that happened 50 years ago is still relevant today, and what I can learn from that.
especially
It's
especially the topics you guys talk about, like that involve so much, like, okay, I'm gonna be like racism and moments in history that, correct if I'm wrong, but people try to kind of maybe not erase but ignore
Hmm.
things because
yeah.
of racism, right?
Hmm.
It's extremely important to bring that up. I don't want to extend myself, but I was telling Jason that when I read Samuel's books, it blew my mind because I was like, okay, I didn't know this, and I like history, and I've been reading history since I'm a kid, and I didn't know these things, and I was like, all right, that's awesome. Okay, do you guys want to add something else?
No, I'll probably end up turning this into a 2 hour talk. So no, not at the moment.
We can
Oh,
okay, I'm gonna put this moment here in the recording. We can schedule another interview in the future. No problem. It's gonna be
Okay, perfect.
fun. All right, so here's an interesting question because I am a collector myself, and the question is, what challenges do you guys? I think it's more towards Jason, but what challenges do you guys face in preserving and maintaining the museum's collection of artifacts and documents?
This is a great question for those that are interested in collecting items. One of the things in the museum industry and what we study in the field of museums that really doesn't prepare you for is this idea of space management, right? Everybody comes to a museum and they think, oh, we have a lot of things. Well, yes, we do have a lot of things. But at the same time, we need to have quality items, right? And so this is kind of the importance of how one of the challenges is to understand what your collection, what you're trying to collect is, what the goal of the collection is trying to do. Don't become a hoarder and just take in everything that you think is cool. Have a goal, an objective that you want. Maybe your collection is to tell a certain story about this one individual. Then highlight key artifacts or key information that does pertain to that story instead of collecting everything about this person. So when it comes to what I do for the museum, is that not only do you have to understand the importance of artifacts to kind of level them, to put them in a hierarchy, right? Also have to preserve it, right? And so preservation is a very big thing on what I do, and a lot of historians do this too, as well as perhaps you as a collector, right? We want to make sure our object is in that state and it doesn't really deteriorate as time goes on. So you have to keep in mind the humidity, keep in mind the temperature. Houston, maybe in your countries too, is very, very humid. And so we have to keep monitoring that humidity level because wet conditions allows for rust, bacteria growth, and all that kind of stuff to grow. And we don't want that. And so humidity is going to be that key thing that we have to engage in order to preserve collections, but also temperature, right? You don't want it too hot of a location because the location is very hot and you have humidity. That's a very nasty environment. So you kind of want to cool lower temperature, maybe about, for us, it's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know about that in Celsius, but you have to probably convert that to a cooler temperature to monitor a lower humidity level, and that way, it can help. Unfortunately, it also plays into that stereotype because with those conditions, you have to monitor the light too. Light is a very big issue that most people don't really fully grasp. Sunlight is very, very damaging on artifacts, especially on paper. So if you have any medical records or any military records, don't expose them to light or sunlight. That's very bad. It will bleach it. So keep photos, documents in like boxes, or ideally acid-free boxes and acid-free wraps to help with that storage. And that's what we've been doing is that. But those materials cost a lot of money. So funding for a small institution is also one of the challenges. Is that we need to buy those supplies, but we're also the funding for a museum is a challenge in and of itself.
Interesting.
I'm
This.
I'm a bit
Yeah, go
curious.
ahead,
So,
Tim.
in the case of the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, like, what do you say? Someone has like photos or items. Like, what are like some questions that you ask yourself before you decide, like, okay, this is something we're going to add to the collection or not?
Excellent question. So when someone has interest in donating to a museum, first thing we do is try to get a physical description of what that object is, right? Because people, what someone thinks is important because they're emotionally attached to the object from an objective point of view may not be that important on the scale of the museum and the narrative and that aspect. No disrespect to that person who wouldn't donate it. Sometimes we have in an ideal situation, right? We may have multiple of that same uniform, and so we don't need another one of those uniforms coming in. So we have to kind of verify that. And so when it comes to photographs, we'll make sure that these photographs, number one, are not from the National Archives or from an easy place that they can maybe they decided to print it down and showcase whatnot. So that we need to make sure that their photographs are unique in and of itself. Once we determine that it's unique in and of itself, we have to uncover what that story in the photograph is trying to showcase. And so, everyone when they take a photo nowadays, especially with modern cameras, right, they just snap, 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 snap. There's really no thought in why they chose that photo, why they chose that time. Back then, when film was very expensive and the access to the film was a lot harder to get to, people had thought on why they chose to photograph this image, right? And so that's the kind of mindset we have to dig ourselves into. And when the people come with photographs, is figure out what was the message, or why did this person take that photograph, and is that message worthy of putting on a museum, worthy of sharing. And so that's kind of what we have to gauge. And then seeing if the photograph, of course, in the condition of the photograph, right? We don't want to put out a photograph that's really bleached, really light, or that's not in really good condition to show other people. Want to find objects and stuff that are well preserved, and that it makes it a lot easier on my on my end to keep that preservation instead of creating a new thing to make sure that it doesn't further deteriorate than it already is in that regard.
Awesome. I think. Do you want to add something, Ko?
No, I just want to brag on Jason a little bit because Jason won't do it. But the re- the reason why I'm glad about Jason being here is because literally, well, not only being here to provide his perspective, but even at the museum, like literally, he's been helpful with the collections. But then also, like even when it came to even when because I collect like you, I collect things too. And thanks to Jason being there, like he was able to kind of inform me and say, hey, like not only inform me, but also inform other people who come to the museum about how to preserve like their families, like records, photos, artifacts. Because, like as Jason will tell you, there's been cases where people will literally come into the museum and say, like, "Hey, I like." I'm curious about donating, but I kind of want to keep this for the family. And in case like that, okay, we understand because again, that's family history. We're going to pass that to the next generation. And so you will have cases where they'll literally come in and they'll ask Jason like, "Hey, how should I preserve this? I may not have that much of a budget, but how do I preserve this?" And Jason's like, "Okay, well, if you have these sources available, this can work. If you have this type of storage facility, this works." Like, so I say this to say that to kind of brag on Jason a little bit because yeah, Jason like he not only helps with the museum collection and
Oh,
also helps with my personal collection, but he also helps with kind of the museum's engagement with the public in that regard because normally when you think about museums and especially in my experience with the museums I came from were like, hey, either you give us your stuff or we can just toss it. And Jason will tell you too that because of stuff like that too, that also has kind of built a negative reputation about museums in certain spaces too. So with the stuff that Jason does in a way that kind of goes, it may not seem like much, but it goes a long way in combating kind of the negative perceptions of museums, especially in the U.S. Because I know, like, I probably could tell you this. I know Jason has told me some stories too, where you had people that would donate these massive collections of like artifacts, and like some of these would be like rare artifacts, insignias, and in some cases uniforms, and I think in some cases even like rifles and firearms. And the museum would be like, "Oh, we're falling apart. Okay, so let's just start selling this stuff." And so it led to a lot of cases where, fortunately, it hasn't happened here, but we've seen it at other institutions where they say, "Well, I would donate this, but I'm afraid y'all going to sell it. I would donate this, but I'm afraid that y'all going to trash it when y'all don't need it." So with Jason, when people come in and ask for help, like I know when people come and they ask me for help, it's most like on the research stuff. But when they come in, they ask for help. Jason does research, but he really does help with that preservation thing because of him doing that. A lot of the people who we've encountered since then, like, they have a more kind of positive view about our museum, but then a little bit about museum professionals in the better too. So I just say I had to brag on Jason about that a little bit. So
One of the things I'll add is I'm an archivist first, then a museum professional. As an archivist, one of the model tenets that we follow is accessibility, right? We want people to have access to that information. And so if you donate stuff to an archive, right, it's very much like putting money into a bank. That money and that knowledge will stay there. It's up to the person to go in and utilize that information. And as archivists, we want that information to be used. We want people to research. We want people to grow. We want people to share that knowledge. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to turn this museum into is a place for accessibility in which people have that avenue for knowledge, right? If you have the means to start your own family archive, why not do that? Why move your stuff to a museum for have them preserve it when you are capable of preserving your own history yourself? So that's what like we want to push is that it doesn't take a fancy degree or fancy whatnot to start your own collection of materials to showcase your own family history. You can do it by yourself. Many of us probably have family scrapbooks, right, of photographs of you having a birthday cakes and all that stuff, and put it in an acid free box, wrap it in some acid free tissue paper, and then there you go. That's the beginning of an archive essentially. Better that's great preservation right there. Acid free means that the cardboard and the paper won't deteriorate due to time, or humidity or whatnot. And so you have the means to build your own archive, do it. Share your own history with your kids, your grandkids. Instead of relying on a public institution. While we are good and we can do that, why not do it? Why not do it yourself if you're capable of it?
It's very nice. You it's very good to listen to it because this I told you, Jason, this wardrobe here, it's full of things. I have here original documents from the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. I have signatures from Brazilian presidents of the time
Wow.
of World War II.
Yeah.
I have many crazy things here, even like Soviet helmets that were dug from the battlefields of Narva. But anyways, I did it myself. I did the whole research about how to preserve these items. I had a lot
Mhm.
of questions, and I never had access to someone who could help me because here in my country, the army make there's a monopoly of the army over
Mhm.
military history, and it's very hard to access this, guys. I'm kind of cracking the nut right now because I'm
Mhm.
going to events and finding people. But yeah, everything you said, it's just brilliant. That's perfect. I
You can
have the
always shoot
pictures
me
of
an
my
email.
grandparents
You
here.
know. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah. Acid-free paper, acid-free boxes.
Mhm.
I never exposed my stuff to light. This
Yeah.
map is from 1951. It's here just because of the show, and then it
Mhm.
goes back inside, never really exposed to light at
That's
all.
good. That's
Right?
good.
Very amazing. Well, I think you guys kind of answered the next question, but I'm gonna put it anyways. Maybe there's something more. It's like what measures are in place to ensure authenticity and historical accuracy of the artifacts in the museum's collection?
So I'll take this one. So when you when it comes down to it, one of the things that we have been improving at this museum has been building a really good reference collection, meaning that you have like books that are based. You have really good books that can tell you, okay, this is what you need to look for. It's particular, I know in case of like weapons and uniforms, this is what you need to look for. So that's one of the things we've been doing. Another thing has been, particularly when it comes to a mixture of donations, but also when it comes to stuff that we try to cover, we try to get as much information from that first person source as possible. So I know in the case when people donate artifacts, well, Jason can probably talk more about it than I can, but I try to give a brief summarization. Like normally we try to ask to say, hey, like when you're donating this artifact, what information can you recall? Like, do you know the person's unit? Do you know where they were deployed? Um, like, do you know of any kind of core experiences that kind of come along with this artifact that you're donating? But I know in the case of the exhibitions that we've been working on, it's been a lot of trips to the archives or basically like reaching out to the archives. In fact, Samuel, he's helped a lot with a lot of the previous exhibitions we've been working on, a lot of the exhibitions we're trying to work on by providing a lot of historical documentation. Because one of the things that, I was working with Jason with, and we've kind of been kind of pushing to the museum leadership is that, hey, when we do these exhibitions, we have to maintain a sense of authenticity, but also objectivity. And in order to properly maintain that, we must have as many sources as possible to help when it comes to presenting this history. Because, I think we'll probably cover it a little bit later, but like we cover some controversial history, and the best thing we can do is make sure that the information we're providing is as accurate as possible. And from that point, kind of letting the people who are visiting come to their own conclusions based off the historic information that we can provide. But when it comes to the authenticity part, especially when it comes to like artifacts and materials, we try to get as many like reputable reference materials as we can. Like in fact, literally before I got on this call, I just heard about this book that came out, I think, on the model 1917 rifle. First thing I did, order. Like So like, basically, so like doing stuff like that, like as soon as you get books out, ordering them. But then more importantly, as Jason taught me, making sure that the sources that you are using are up to date, making sure that like in which I know is a challenge for a lot of early Buffalo Soldier research, but in the case of World War II, it's a little bit easier. Like make sure that hey, like when this author writes this book, when did they publish it? What are their sources? Like are they sorting national archives? Like, are they sorting other historians? Where those historians are getting their sources from? Because I know one of the issues that Jason and I kind of encountered early on when we first got to the museum is that while the museum would use sources, a lot of the sources were out of date. So like I think there was one case where like there was like this exhibition that was done and the book that was cited was from the 1970s. And while that book is considered a seminal text, since the 1970s, there's been a lot of updates and information that has come out since then. It's like updates in terms of how people viewed the history or sources becoming available that might have been not have been available in 76. So pretty much in order to maintain the historical authenticity as best we can, pretty much for the best way I can describe it is for everything that goes on display or every exhibition that goes up or even like every artifact that comes in, best believe there's anywhere between I would say at a minimum 4 to 10 hours of research to make sure that whatever that thing is that we verified it, that the information is correct, and that the context behind it fits perfectly with the mission that the museum is going for.
I would.
One thing
So,
to add to Kale's thing is people. People have been instrumental in helping us figure out what is real, what is not, what is that. Because at the end of the day, what we study is what we know. There's some things that we may not study that we rely on other people. So in our museum, we've made it an effort to reach out to other museums that might have experts on that subject matter that we may not know about. We would use ask them on their opinions, and they can contribute as well because the world is a very vast place. Everyone's knowledge is very kind of in their own niche, right? And so we want to connect with these people, network with these people, network with these professionals. That's why we're talking with Mr. Samuel here and even you here. So that eventually, someday, when we have someone coming in with Brazilian Expeditionary Force objects, we can reach out to you, and you will be able to help us with that. So people is also a very important element in helping us find historical accuracies in that regard.
you were mentioning networking with internet. It's fantastic, but it's necessary, right? We
Mhm.
connect with people to in order. Go ahead, Samuel. Sorry, you're going to say something.
No, it was just I wanted to stress it. So, like for every object that's on display in the museum, there's 8 to 10 hours of research behind it, and
Well,
that's like next. Oh yeah,
I was gonna say with the objects that Jason and I have worked with
yeah.
because like I would because so far I know when it comes to the museum, it's one of those situations. Like, see, because Jason, like I said, I think we're just now making 2 years. Am I right, Jason? Because I know
Yeah,
you started a little bit earlier before I
yeah.
did. So
We
like
have
so
two
pretty much.
exhibitions up, and the thing is, we don't really choose a lot of artifacts in that regard, right? Because 10 hours of each artifact is a lot of work. So our modern exhibitions now are like maybe at most 10 to 12 artifacts, and that's the limit because of all the research we have to do. It's very time consuming, you know. So yeah, the modern exhibitions, yeah, are like that. But the ones in the past, we haven't really worked on that because our museum, for those who may not know, is going through a reorganization restructuring. And so within 2 years from now, the space will be completely different from what people have already seen in the past. Moving up with best museum practices, essentially.
Yeah, Samuel.
No, I just wanted to say that this is maybe a good time to go on to the next question, which is how do you balance the interests of history enthusiasts with those of casual visitors in your programming and in your exhibitions? I mean, I can imagine there's a lot more information to share than a person can process in a single day.
Oh, most definitely. So this is where, as Jason said best, people help with this. So in the past, when the museum would put up an exhibition, the museum would just be like, okay, we're putting this up. We don't care what people say. That's it. And so, and to be fair, I know with the past few exhibitions, it's kind of a similar where we kind of had ideas for exhibitions on like lesser known subjects, and we like, okay, well, let's try to improve on that and put it up. I know with future concepts that Jason has been spearheading is that, okay, we try to get more community involvement with the selection of exhibitions, because in the case of the museum, and really this is kind of one of the battles that Jason will tell you that turns me into like, that will turn me into like the like losing my mind type person, because Jason and I are really the like, shall I say, the hardcore historians at our institution. The majority of people who work around us, they're like, yeah, we don't understand the words y'all saying. Y'all just saying numbers and all this other stuff. And so what ends up happening is that for the history enthusiasts who come in, especially for the exhibitions prior to this point, they feel like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that's missing and everything else. But for the general public who are coming, like, oh wow, this is amazing. And so to try to split the difference and try to keep the engagement of the history enthusiasts while at the same time trying to bring in a new audience, one of the things we've been doing, like particularly when it comes to covering lesser known units, is that we try to give, especially when it comes to certain units, the 93rd, for example, we kind of gave, to me personally, I felt it was a kind of a shallow introduction of the 93rd, but to the history enthusiasts, when they saw the exhibition, like, oh wow, you're actually covering this unit. I've heard a little bit about it, but I'm glad that y'all are kind of getting the name out there. And for the casual enthusiasts, the casual people that would come in and view it, they were just amazed to hear something new sometimes. So it's like, oh wow. And because one of the things that I've noticed too, and like Jason will attest to, this kind of one of the battles that happens at our job when we come up with discussions for exhibitions. There's always this constant battle of focusing on the well-known unit to draw in people who are just have a casual interest, at the risk or forsaking the history enthusiasts who like, yeah, we've heard about this. But then we've also run into the battle too, where like in my case, like one of the exhibitions I think I wanted to cover was just purely air-based security battalions. History enthusiasts are like, oh, that sounds interesting. I want to hear more about that.
Mhm.
The casual visitors like Army Air Force, are they Tuskegee Airmen? And then it's like, oh. So as a result, to try to split the difference, what we try to do is say, okay, well, and I think this is where Michelle really gets on my case, and Jason will tell you like she gets mad at me about this all the time. We try to say, okay, well, we can mention we can mention a lesser known unit, but we can either tie them back to a well known unit or a well known subject or a well known theme. So that way, when people come in, the people who are really into the history will be like, oh wow, I didn't know about this unit, or I've heard a little bit about this unit, but I'm glad that stuff is being clarified on them. And the people that are coming in, they learn something new about it, and then they learn something new about a segment of history that they may not have encountered before, and they also are able to connect it more importantly to their personal experience. Because like primary example with the 93rd again, one of the things that I was most proud of with the exhibition was the fact that when the exhibition came online, you had people who might not have been interested in history at all would come and see the exhibition and like, wait a minute, that unit sounds familiar. Like, oh, that was my great grandfather's unit. Oh, that was my great uncle's unit. And then it will spark a conversation where they will start talking about like, hey, like, well, my grandfather kept telling me about something about this random island in the Pacific and what they dealt with. So it leads to it will lead to kind of more conversations, and a more conversation, I'll say kind of an awakening with both the history enthusiasts and the casual viewers, because at the end of the day, like even kind of tying back to what I mentioned before, a lot of people, particularly I know in the case of the Black American community who had veterans in World War II, only a handful will be like, oh, I know his exact unit and stuff like that. For most, it's like, I just heard about him being deployed to the Philippines. I heard about him being deployed to Bougainville. I heard about him being deployed here. And so when with even with kind of highlighting these lesser known units, that provides an avenue for people who might have heard about the Tuskegee Air, might have heard about the 71st Tank Battalion, to kind of to more likely see more of themselves in it, or more of their family. Because as I mentioned before, like even in my personal case, I don't have any family that's Tuskegee Airmen, but yet like that's the one that most people hear about. Most people hear about most people I'm at the meeting at the museum say, "Oh, I've heard about the 71st Tank Battalion," but my father, he was an engineer, or my grandfather, he was an artillery unit, and I don't hear about those guys. So with us covering those lesser known units, that provides an avenue for them to kind of see themselves and their relatives in it, and kind of be able to engage directly with it. And with the history enthusiasts, they're able to say, okay, well, that actually adds more of a picture to this, or this kind of clarifies what I've been hearing over here. So, like, that's the best way I can explain it with
So
something
That's
condensed.
very good.
I'll add on to Kale's thing. In the museum field, we denote our audience with three different types. We have the skimmers, the swimmers, and the divers. These are the terms that everyone will use in the museum industry. Is the skimmers are the guys that come in, look at the cool things, and leave. They're very quick through the exhibitions, right? The swimmers will engage with certain big idea concepts, big themes about the exhibition coming in. They'll probably read a couple context panels, a couple object stuff, and then they'll head out. The divers, those are the history enthusiasts. Those are the guys that will read every single word you have on your panels, every single word you have on your labels, and then judge you essentially on how well you guys portray the information. And those are the guys that we are ones we try to tailor to in both me and Kale, because we're those type of people. We understand how they work, right? And so for us, we love those people who come in and ask questions, who challenge our exhibition, say, hey, I actually saw this and this instead of what you're presenting with this information here. And we love to engage with those, and the best way to engage with us is through email. We pass out business cards like they're cookies to people, and so we hope people will email us and talk with us about their experiences, what they thought about our exhibitions and stuff like that, so we can use that feedback and build a better exhibition in that regard. So with that being stated, it depends on who the audience and how we judge them, and we tailor it. So like elementary, primary kids, they're not going to be. We're not going to be talking about the same things that adults or even elderly people will be talking about, right? We change our subject matter based on the audience, because sometimes uh, we do controversial topics, and sometimes kids may not need to learn about this information until they're further in their development, until they can comprehend the consequences of those actions, and what's going on essentially.
It's nice you said that the, sometimes you approach controversial things. It leads us to the next question would be like how does the museum addresses sensitive or controversial aspects of Buffalo Soldiers history in its presentations?
So
Yeah,
one of the,
yeah.
yeah, I'll take it. Because so
I'll add on to what you have to say.
Sensitive.
Yeah.
so so as I mentioned before, one of the things we've been trying to improve upon is, one, the demystification of the Buffalo Soldiers, but then two, acknowledging what the Buffalo Soldiers did, and putting, and again, having the resources and historical material to back up what we're saying. Because, like, in fact, I want to say when our director of education came on board, she actually faced a lot of backblast, because one of the first things that she was asking that, hey, we're talking about Buffalo Soldiers, but we don't have the Native American perspective of who these guys fought. And when we do have their perspective, the perspective we have is that of a stereotypical Native American, rather than the the complex and nuanced experience that the Native Americans had with Buffalo Soldiers. And so, and ironically, a lot of the backblast that she faced, ironically, was from a mixture of leadership, but also from visitors, because a lot of it goes into what Jason mentioned before. A lot of the visitors we have, one of the things that we find ourselves combating since we started this museum is the demystification of the Buffalo Soldiers. And so a lot of people that we encounter, they have this view that, oh, well, X, Y, and Z, or this and this stuff like that. So the best way we try to combat it at the museum, or basically like when it comes to addressing controversial topics or sensitive topics, provide all the information that we have as possible, and from there let the people who are observing kind of make their decision. But again, providing but basically when they're making a decision, let them provide like all the historical information we have as possible, the historical context of the time frame, and then letting them kind of go from there. Because I want to say in a lot of cases that I've seen in spaces like this, when you talk about controversial topics, you either go the route of let's avoid it entirely, and I'll be honest, I think that's what our institution has done in the past, where when it comes to like the not only the Native American impact, but one of the impacts that I found kind of interesting when it came to Black military service in both World War One and World War Two, the conflicts that Black soldiers had with Jim Crow laws and how you would see that turn into violent clashes. Now, with the exception of one case at the museum, by and large, they kind of avoided that topic entirely, and part of that was because of the perceived audience of the museum. So perceived audience, and also like I understand from the museum leadership perspective, their concern is donors. So like whereas Jason and I like we're like we love the history. Like okay, let's just go ahead talk about it. Let's just go ahead get it out there and let people come to their own conclusions. But oftentimes, what we run into with the museum leadership is that, well, like, yeah, we get that, but we're also concerned because this could impact money. And more importantly, to bring it back home to y'all, it's going to impact your pay. So as a result, we have to, like, on the exhibition, and I know in the case of Jason, too, he was attest to this probably in more details than I can. We try to provide as much historical information, historical content as possible, and let people kind of make their own judgments from there. But also, like when it comes to the topic, try to explain it and not this black and white thing, but really kind of in the historical nuanced situation. Because like all of us here, we probably have experienced cases where people say, "Oh yeah, these people are good, these people are bad," and like, well, when you do more research, you
Yeah.
kind of realize it's kind of morally gray. So
The beautiful thing
Yeah.
about history is that there is no one right answer, right? It depends on your perspective, depends on the facts that you are aware of, and depends on the open mindedness of a person. And so with our museum, what we're like Kale mentioned, we don't want to push that what we're saying is right. That's not our goal. And a good museum, what we do is we guide people. We guide them with questions, let them draw their own conclusions. After all, what good are facts if you can't utilize those facts by drawing your own conclusion and drawing your own thoughts upon it to think deeper in a sense, right? And so when it comes to controversy, I love, love, love talking about controversial subjects because it engages the mind, right? You figure out what the other person is thinking, how they approach the subject matter, then you realize, oh, these are the facts that they're running with. And then as a museum, you can say, hey, let me share these facts with you that may shed light on a different perspective, and hoping you can engage and understand that perspective, so you're not really hardcore on one stance, but you realize, hey, I understand this perspective, and so that way you can gauge these controversial topics at a much, I guess, logical and reasonable sense, instead of hardlining on a certain thing. And so we provide information, provide context in that regard, and we really push for people who go to museums to draw their own conclusions, to utilize what they've learned, what they've seen in an exhibition, and come up with their own kind of mindset about certain controversial themes.
This is very good approach. Congratulations. I love this. Love to hear this. I'm excited with the possibility to visit your exhibitions for real. Amazing, amazing. We never avoid controversial things here as well, Samuel. We've
Yeah.
yeah, we've done
Mm.
kind of crazy things. We went
No, but I
for it.
think that's also important because, like you mentioned, there's a lot to history, and of course, like people like the fun stuff in history, but if you only engage with the stuff that you
Mhm.
think is fun or that you think is interesting, you're skipping out on a lot of things that add information to things that you find interesting.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's, yeah,
fantastic.
just something I was thinking about.
Amazing. It's a very good answer. By the way, we are walking towards the end now. So I know, I think Ko mentioned a couple of future plans of the museum, but let's talk a little bit about it. So what future plans or initiatives do you have for expanding the museum's educational outreach or collection?
So when it comes to expanding the museums, I would say education, exhibition, collections, outreach, the main thing, and Jason will like this is one of the things again I give Jason credit for because I can talk to people, but I'm like very southern U.S. Like I'm just hit to the point and maybe just get squirrely. Whereas Jason knows how to present it in a very concise manner. But so I have to borrow from Jason on this one. When it comes to the museum, we're trying to expand more so on the long term legacy of not only black soldiers who served in these conflicts, but also kind of the impacts they had on their communities, the impact they might have had on culture and other things. And so when it comes to it, like I said before, the museum historically just focused on Buffalo soldiers on the Western frontier, and that's it. And so with the future, we're trying to go a little bit before that to kind of explain, okay, what series of events have led to the creation of these regiments, and then when you get to the service of these regiments, how their service impacted the service of others, how it impacted like local or federal laws, how it might have impacted other things. So, and then when even these units are disbanded or desegregation or segregation ends in the U.S. military, what is the long term legacy of that? And one of the things that this kind of leads to one of the things I've kind of been thinking about, and I was talking to Jason about, and we're trying to work on currently. When you see Black military history talked about, particularly in the U.S., and they talk about the legacy of Black military service, the almost immediate thing that people want to go to is the civil rights movement. And again, I understand why. It's 20 years after a lot of the veterans were still alive. Some of the veterans directly participated in it. And but however, that's only part of the story. And for when I feel like I'll be honest, I mean, like, this is a controversial opinion, so I'll let y'all know in advance. When like to me, when I see a military historian or even a black military historian say like, oh, like their legacy is the civil rights movement. They're only telling half of the story. In reality, there is basically in terms of socioeconomic and political, the socioeconomic and political impact, it goes, of course, well into today, but also the things that people don't really think that's connected to military history goes well into today too. And so one of the exhibitions that we've been trying to work on, like I kind of don't like really talking too much about it 'cause I'm still in the research phases of it, but Jason kind of let the cat out of the bag at one of the events, like talking about the kind of the connections between black veterans and car culture, particularly low riding that occurs in California. So like I'm still doing research on it, but what you end up seeing is that some of the Black World War II veterans who were particularly like mechanics, either mechanics in the Army Air Forces or mechanics in the Army, they learn how to work on hydraulic systems and stuff like that. And of course, what's one of the things that you see that occurs in America after the World War II? The proliferation of cars, and this because cars became kind of a sense of not only freedom but also individuality. And so you see where some of these veterans, either they themselves or because of the skills they learn, they teach their kids, hey, this is how you have this system work, how you have this, so you can lift your car, you can lower it on command. So like so like kind of doing stuff like that. I know one of the things I would like to plan in the future is kind of connection between like black military service and food culture through the globe, like how basically people would bring like yeah, because Jason's a big foodie, so we got to get that done. But so like I said, so like while yes, we're still going to continue doing exhibitions about like lesser known black units, and of course like some of the stuff that we typically associate with black military history and kind of the immediate legacy, we also want to do exhibitions like the ones I just mentioned because it also it shows that like again with military history isn't just restricted to like the guys like who like yeah we like firearms like it impacts everybody. And like whether people may acknowledge it or not, it touches a little bit of everything from like the stuff that we typically associate with military history, just things that we don't associate with military history. And so by doing that, the idea is that one, it shows how expansive the subject is, but two, it provides an avenue for people who may have an interest in it, but or may not even realize they may have an interest in the subject to kind of come into it, and then that it ultimately helps out our field because that brings more perspectives that we may not think about as military historians, or as Jason will call himself, a war historian, that we may not like. It brings in more views in the field that can basically help pretty much everybody involved in this. So, but that's kind of me
One
being idealistic. So,
One thing I'll add to Kale, and I think I'll give credit to him because he does a good job on it, is that social aspect of military history, right? Museums and that work really well because at the end of the day, our museum, what our goal is to build a community of people, to give a community a space, a place for people to come in and learn or to share their stories, right? Give a space for veterans themselves to come in and have people understand their stories. And so community building in that aspect is very important for us. And one of the initiatives that we're going to launch very soon is our oral history project again. We want to gather stories. We want to gather information on people and their experiences to share with others so that others can relate, others can see that, the military uniform is not just a monolithic thing, right? Behind every uniform, there is actually a person just like me and you, who made the ultimate sacrifice to join the military and risk their lives for a cause that they believed in. And so we need to honor that as a military history space. We do that, and so we want to push that on to that share that story with others. So what I mean by that is, as Mr. Samuel mentioned in the past, he interviewed children who had their parents killed in the war, and so orphans are a great story and great perspective to have. But also those others, such as significant others, right? When a husband or a wife gets deployed overseas, we don't really have that military history about their spouses or their significant other and how per- they perceived their significant other in their military service. Not only that, what about little Tommy, little Jim here? His mom and dad, they've gone to the military service. They're gone for maybe 6 months. How did that kid cope with that military service? These are stories that have yet to be explored really in the military history field. And so for us, we want to pioneer, we want to push out subjects like these so that other people who may not have a military background or military um, within their families, but they can understand it because maybe they have an uncle who served in the military and they can connect it through that way. So we want to push the idea of a greater community of people that understand the veterans themselves to that community as well.
Lovely, beautiful, amazing. Um, Samuel, do you want to say something? Do you want to add something? No, all right. Okay, so this is it's not a question itself, but it's the last movement of the show. I want to invite you to invite people to visit the museum, give our audience information about how can they buy tickets, where is the museum itself, how they can get there, and also after you do that, you can add anything you want to the show, to our audience, and okay.
I'll let you go first on this one,
Well,
Jason.
All right. So our museum, the Buffalo Soldier National Museum, is in Houston, Texas, United States. We're in downtown Houston. Tickets are normally $10. Those with student and military ID are discounted 50%, so $5 for tickets. We do tours, and they're going to be scheduled with Dr. Tovar. So you can find us at our website, buffalosoldiersmuseum.org for the
yeah,
other
yeah, just
information.
sorry for interrupting you. I'm gonna put the link to the website in the description of the episode, whichever platform you're listening to it. It's gonna be in the description, right? Sorry, Jason, you can
Okay,
continue.
no problem. Us continuing off what our host mentioned. Um, our hours are from Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursdays are free from 1 p.m. till 4. So those are our hours of operations. We look forward to seeing you there. One thing I want to add is don't let people deter you from studying history. History is a very important field to study, and that's my little platform to bash those in the STEMs. Because everyone's focused on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. They need to focus on history, ethics, civics, and that aspect as well too.
The only thing I'll add to it is that I know there's a big event we're planning on doing for next year. So next year is going to be the 160th anniversary of Juneteenth, which Juneteenth, for those that don't know, is a recently federal holiday in the United States that focuses on the ending of slavery in the South, basically during the Civil War. And I say ending of slavery in the South, not really the true end of slavery, because 13th Amendment, 14th, and that kind of ends that. But to kind of honor that 160th anniversary, one of the aspects that was really critical to the celebration of not only Juneteenth but the Emancipation Proclamation in a lot of the areas of the South was the role that USCT, or United States Colored Troops, played in enforcing that. And so, what the museum is doing, kind of going back to that living historian portion that we mentioned before, we're trying to get a living history encampment that will pretty much be staffed pretty much entirely by USCT reenactors. Well, living historians, sorry, because Jason will keep behind about this, but having a lot of living historians on hand who will be able to tell the story of Juneteenth from the perspective of soldiers in the USCT, as well as having people there to kind of explain how Juneteenth impacted various communities, or every from impacting the USCT veterans themselves, the formerly enslaved who was in those areas, as well as the people who were in other areas that was impacted by Juneteenth. So that's the thing that we're doing. And then the last thing I would say is, yeah, just keep studying. If you love this subject, like, well, gonna be always gonna keep doing it anyway. But like, if you're in this field and you know some people that are some young, as we would say, young bloods that's in this field that want to learn, like, help them out if you can. Like, reach one, teach one, as they like to say sometimes here. So yeah,
Gail, you forgot to share the
Amazing.
dates for the event.
dang it. so so the event itself, I don't know why it's gonna be 3 days, but like 3 days. And the first event on June 19th is gonna be the soirees and the exhibition opening for those people. But the main thing that matters is June 20th and June 21st, because that's when the Living History and Camp is going to take place. Uh, for those of y'all who are in these spaces, I would say if you can attend, great. If you can't, we may have some surprise that may help getting some visuals, and who knows, we may have some people that y'all may know about that may come by. So hopefully things work out perfectly, and yeah, hopefully the historian in me doesn't basically have a spasmodic attack and fall over because they're not doing the history right. So
All right. And you, Samuel, do you want to add something? No, is that fine? All right. I want to invite everyone to follow the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum on Instagram. I was scrolling down the posts yesterday. It's very good, very nice. Yesterday, coincidentally, it was this December 7th, and it was there was a post about Doris Miller, and very nice page. Who runs the page? Is that you, Jason?
No, it's our social
No,
media
it's
team.
someone else.
yeah,
All right. No, they're doing a very good job. It's a very nice page, very organized. I love it.
You
Okay,
mentioned Doris
so
Miller, but maybe it's also good to briefly explain it for the context.
what?
Oh,
Sorry.
To briefly explain Doris Miller for the context.
Oh, all right.
okay.
So yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
So I'll
No,
yeah I'll explain them. So Doris Miller would become one of three Black Navy Cross recipients in World War II. He was a mess attendant on the USS West Virginia. And for context, when it came to black sailors in the Navy, pretty much I would say between World War One and World War Two, pretty much I think after War One, black sailors were only restricted to being mess attendants and stewards, which was essentially like cooks and butlers for the naval officers. One of the things I kind of learned recently, kind of a sidebar, was that we tend to assume that ship's cooks were all black. In reality, some ship's cooks were white, like especially for the enlisted. Some were white, but when it came to the mess attendants and stewards, they tended to be black and also Filipino. And then I think in some cases you actually had some Chinese mess attendants and stewards as well. But basically, with mess attendants and stewards, when battle stations occurred, they would either help out with wounded or just kind of like shunt ammunition around the ship. So Pearl Harbor's attacked. He basically goes to the station. He assists in trying to aid the captain, and the captain passes away. But so what he does, he mans a water cooled, if I'm calling it a water cooled 50 caliber machine gun. He had no training on one whatsoever, and shot at Japanese aircraft till the ammunition ran out. And so some will say he shot down some. I think some will say he shot down one aircraft. Some will say they shot down three. Nobody really knows in terms of what the records will say. But initially, Dory Miller, when you hear about his story, he was given a commendation along with some other mess attendants and stewards who were at Pearl Harbor. But the NAACP and I want to say some other advocacy sources kept saying, "Hey, like y'all are giving these Medal of Honors to these people who were at Pearl Harbor." We kept hearing reports about basically Navy about some black sailors who were doing really good details. Why are they not being given any attention? And so ultimately, they end up investigating the history and they're finding out that yeah, there was quite a few black sailors, and ultimately it led to Dory Miller receiving the Navy Cross. So like I said, I think there's a parade probably coming through this neighborhood. So I'm sorry about the police sirens. It's not based on some nefarious activities happening here, but so but like yeah, I said to say that Dory Miller is one of the more prominent black Navy Cross recipients from World War II that occurred at Pearl Harbor. But you also had a lot of other mess attendants that were there. In fact, I was talking to Jason about this the day before, and we were saying how there's actually some other stories of valor and heroism that occurred at Pearl Harbor. You had some, and in fact, like you also had some tragic stories too. I want to say one of the guys, mess attendants that was on the Oklahoma, he was literally 2 weeks from retirement. Like, so, like, because he served since 1918 and he managed to stay in the Navy even after the Navy stopped enlisting black sailors in the 1920s. So, like while again, that's kind of the history guy in me. Like, yes, we got a lot of love for Dory Miller, but I kind of I have to get on the PR team about kind of, and I have to go find that list of all the black mess attendants and stewards were who basically who basically were killed at Pearl Harbor, and also the other guys who were nominated for valor as well. So I hope that this kind of put a damper on Dory Miller. It's not to say that Dory Miller did a really good thing. I got a lot of love for him. It's like I said, it's that kind of highlighting the lesser knowns too, with getting them out there. So
That's the theme of our museum is that we want to highlight the lesser known stuff.
Yeah, we're on the same page with this show in your museum, given the proper um, levels of greatness. Well, uh, this is the end of the episode 9. I would like to thank you all that reached this far in the episode. I really want to thank, like, from the bottom of my heart, Cale and Jason, for attending, for dedicating your time for this show. When I got the news that you were joining, I was super excited. It was like, okay, these guys are from a real museum. They're doing a very good job. I started searching about it. I was super excited. I would like to thank Samuel for his brilliancy on Friday on organizing everything, coming up with the questions and everything. Um, it was a very good episode. I hope our audience enjoyed and learned a lot about not only the museum but history itself. Again, I want to invite everybody to follow us on our social medias. The World War II Daily, Samuel De Corti. The links will be available on the description of this episode. Also, all the information you need about the museum, their Instagram page, their website will be in the description of this episode as well. We invite you to go there if you live near Houston. Take your time, go visit the museum. I'm pretty sure that after this conversation, the visit will be worth it. It's going to be amazing for sure. Again, this episode is available on YouTube, Deezer, Spotify, and Amazon. Is there something else I'm missing? Oh, yeah, the next guest. We are having some issues with our schedule, but that's natural, I think. So next episode will be recorded on the next month, the month of January. We're going to be interviewing Cesar Campiani, a big FEB expert that I just got to know, Samuel, that he's going to publish a new book, and this book's going to be in English. So there will be more sources about the Brazilian Expeditionary Force out there in English, which is truly amazing. Thanks again to everyone. This is it. I'll see you on the next one. Hello there. Thank you very much for watching until the end. If you liked the video, please leave it a like. If you didn't like, unlike it and tell us in the comments how we can improve. Don't forget to subscribe because that supports us a lot. And stay tuned for more here in the World War II Daily podcast. Thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one.